So I remember how mesmerized I was sitting in Madame Saint-Jean's 5th grade French class. She was a French Canadian with a zest for life and for language and for teaching, and she taught us French the old-fashioned way, not with grammar books and lots of conjugations, but through listening and speaking. And sometime during that year, I had a lightning bolt moment because I realized that if I learned how to speak French, I could talk to more people. And I could talk to, don't giggle, I could talk to different people. I could even talk to people from another country. And so began my love affair with foreign language. Language has always been captivating to me because it allows me to communicate with others, to be in relationship with others, to learn about others, to talk with others. And apparently some of my friends and family think that when I talk, I can really talk. But even more than talking, language allows me to understand the other, to understand someone who is different than me, to understand a new perspective. So maybe it's not surprising that this Tower of Babel story has always really frustrated me. There everyone was speaking the same language with each other. They were understanding each other pretty well. Maybe they were doing just smashingly communicating with each other, and God decides to mix it all up to confuse the language and to scatter the people. Why would God do that when it was going so well? Now, some biblical interpreters think that humans were just getting a little too sure of themselves, right? They were becoming a little too self-reliant. They were building things all the way to heavens, and maybe God needed to remind them of their place as part of the bigger whole. And we do, as humans, have those tendencies, so okay. Still, doesn't God want us to be united and uniting, as Sandra so beautifully preached about last week, understanding each other, coming together? I mean, it's hard enough to understand someone else when they're speaking the same language as you, right? Much less trying to understand a different language. How are we ever to come together as one people in peace and justice and love if we are scattered abroad and if we don't have one language? And yet, look what happens in this morning's story of Pentecost. That wasn't the whole story, of course. That was just the very beginning. And the line I meant, there's one more piece to it. They spoke the languages, and the people understood. And so as I was preparing this message, I realized that in my mind, I'd always thought of Pentecost as the opposite of the Tower of Babel. But they're not. So in the Tower of Babel, we have one language that goes to many, and the people are scattered. And in the story of Pentecost, it's not as if God reinstated one language again, right? No. The Holy Spirit empowers the Jesus followers to speak in many different languages. And the long and the short of it is, the people understand. Many, many people understand. Not one language, not one expression, many. Just like in the story of Babel. So is it possible that each one of us is called to scatter out into the world, speaking a language that only we can speak? Because we do speak this English language, but each one of us is such a specific expression. We have a particular language that we speak through our life. Is it possible that we are called to meet one another in our splendidly diverse expressions, and to share what we have learned, and to listen deeply, and to listen hard, and to question, so that we might understand someone we didn't think we might understand? So experience has taught me that sometimes we just don't know someone else's language well enough, or they don't know ours. So I remember a time, a long, long, long time ago in the 1980s, when, I know, the 1980s, when I was sitting in a hospital in China, wishing that I had a much better command of the Chinese language. My friends and I had gone for the weekend, and we'd gone to the beach, which was wonderful, and we had had a huge feast of the local crab. And we all had a wonderful time, and the next morning I woke up, and I had a headache, and I had a fever, and I had blotchy stuff all over my skin. And I was in a strange, somewhat remote town in the People's Republic of China in the middle 1980s. It's a good thing my mother didn't know too much about that. She was far away. So I spoke well enough to explain to this doctor that, I had eaten crabs the night before, and I could understand him well enough to know that probably I had some kind of food poisoning. But what I wasn't too clear on was this medicine that he was giving me to take. Chinese medicine, Western medicine, different, particularly back then. So he was giving me these little white pellets of something that I had no idea what it was. Now, today I would Google it, right? I'd Google it and I'd find out what it was. But back then, no cell phones. Can you believe it, girls? No cell phones, no Google. I just had to trust. I longed in those moments to be home, safe, where my family could take care of me, where I knew the language, where I could understand and be understood easily, without too much work. I longed to be speaking that language that was easy, simple, required little effort. And maybe those Jesus followers who were gathered that day on Pentecost, maybe that morning they were hoping for a nice, familiar gathering too. They'd been together for 50 days after Jesus had died and become resurrected. And so I wonder, they must have wanted to be speaking the same language and have it be easy. But apparently the Spirit had other plans, blowing in with wind and fire. That day, which is often referred to as the birthday of the church, as Denny mentioned before, it was a day of movement. It was a day of new expressions. It was a day of new understandings. It was a day in which people let themselves be filled by something greater than their own selves. A day in which people listened carefully to one another. It was a day of understanding. So, church, are we ready for this? Are we ready for this kind of movement? Are we ready to listen to the new language of our youth? Are we ready to enter into dialogue with scientists and ecologists and poets and artists? Are we ready to become multilingual, entering into relationships with Buddhists and Muslims and Jews and Hindus? What can we understand about our own deepest questions when we listen carefully to the thoughtful spiritual adults who don't identify with any particular faith? How can we understand ourselves more fully when we learn the language of a trauma survivor or a refugee or someone who was rescued by a teacher or held safe by a firefighter? If Creator's Spirit scattered us and gave us different languages and expressions of divine mystery, don't you want to learn more, listen more? Don't you want to share more and understand more? In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, he said, "These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit. For the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God." Are we ready for this searching? I see some yeses. I like that. Some head nods. Good. I can't think of anything that our world needs more today than compassionate understanding of our inner selves, of our culture, our politics, our economics, our religions, of our place and our power in this evolving cosmic story. The voices of spiritual and religious people, voices of truth and hope and compassion, these are the voices that can shape the way forward. are the voices that we so desperately need to hear on the ground, over the airwaves, and on our Facebook feeds, or Twitter feeds, or Instagram. And they are everywhere. They are you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and you. Acclaimed journalist Krista Tippett writes in her new book, Becoming Wise, spiritual geniuses of the everyday are everywhere. They are in the margins and do not have publicists. They are below the radar, which is broken. In my field of journalism, where we presume to write the first draft of history, we summon our deepest critical capacities for investigating what is inadequate, corrupt, catastrophic, and failing. But our world is abundant with beauty and courage and grace. I'm aware of a growing aspiration to attend with all the tools we have at hand to the human change that makes social change possible. We create transformative, resilient new realities by becoming transformed, resilient people. On the very first youth mission trip that I ever led, we were in Miami. Very brave. I thought I was very brave taking 18 kids on an airplane to Miami. Thank goodness they all came back, right? Anyway, on that first mission trip, I had a young man pull me aside before we left for our first day's assignment. We were headed to an Easter Seals adult daycare center. Dawn, he said, I can't do this. I mean, I really can't do this. I'm seriously not comfortable with older people. I don't know how to be around them. It's okay to be a little nervous, I said. You'll be all right. You'll get through it. You'll see. And we're all in it together. We'll help you. Don't worry. So after a bit more resistance, he half-heartedly joined the group and off he went. Miraculously, he really seemed to enjoy himself dancing with some of the older ladies. And they didn't seem to mind his long hair, tattoo, or heavy metal t-shirt. That too was a success. That night he came to talk to me right before lights out. Hey, Dawn, he said, I'm really glad you made me do that today. I was really nervous, but you know, I think I made a difference today. And you know, old people, they're really kind of cool. And you know, that was a lightning bolt moment for me. That was a lightning bolt moment for him. And that was a lightning bolt moment maybe for some of the people that he worked with that day. And that wouldn't have happened if he hadn't stepped out over that edge, if he hadn't trusted that the Spirit was going to lead him, if he hadn't leaned into that growth a little bit, you know? And it's hard. It can be scary. And we all have different comfort zones and different places, you know, where we are okay taking a little risk or not. But these moments don't happen unless we step out a little bit. So I love lightning bolt moments. And so I wanted to ask you to turn to the front of your bulletins, to that Chinese character there, because the neatest thing happened when I was preparing for this week. As you've probably figured out, Mandarin Chinese is a language that I care deeply for. I love. I don't speak it as well as I used to. But one of the great things about Chinese is that we have these pictures that help us to understand what the meaning of a word is. So the word spirit that you see on the front of your bulletin, there's two different parts to it, two radicals they're called. And the radical on the left is the radical that means altar or worship. And the radical on the right is the pictograph that means lightning. at the altar of lightning. At the altar of lightning. Spirit. That's how we interpret it, as spirit. The altar of lightning. Wow. So the altar of lightning came to mix things up that Pentecost morning, right? And so understanding could spring forth. So friends, neighbors, community, are you ready? Here we are on the birthday of the community shaped by Jesus and the Spirit. Can we step out of our comfort zone? It is so good to gather and be here, but can we take this out there? Can we take this love, these languages that we speak, can we take it into our life? Can we expand our understanding? Can we find new perspectives? And can you see how that actually will bring us closer and closer and closer together? We were scattered for a reason. Our languages were confused and mixed up for a reason. So I wonder if we were meant to find our way back to unity by finding our way back to ourselves, by finding our way back to each other, by finding our way back to the earth, and by finding our way back to God.